Rebecca, is that you? Hi. You look great.
Thanks.
Are you
Fun.
Are you at your house?
Yeah.
Nice.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I didn't realize that your house was white. I don't think I've ever seen it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's white.
Nice. It looks good. Have you been staying busy?
Yeah, actually, I've been doing lots of webinars and education stuff. And
Nice. I started really hard on that stuff like at the beginning of quarantine when it was like freaky, you know, like we weren't leaving our houses at all. And so I like got 99% of the way done with the RENE one. And then I finished the short sale and foreclosure, like those classes on the realtor website. But then I like totally fell off the bandwagon and haven't been doing them. But I plan to like finish them. So.
Yeah, I keep kind of doing this, you know, like you go at hardcore and then like, I don't know, I forget it for like 2 days and I'm like, crap, I better get back on that before I totally forgot everything that I already went over.
Yeah.
So.
And
yeah,
that's like when I was taking the classes too, because I did them online. And
yeah, me too.
Yeah. And what program did you use?
I went through Kaplan and it was not good.
Really?
I wouldn't recommend it. How about you?
I did Real Estate Express and it was on sale. Like who knew that, you know, like programs like that went on sale. So I got it really cheap and I was really, really happy with it. And I didn't think that I would be, like I was really worried, but I think that they do so many quizzes and tests like on all the material that I actually did pretty well on the test, like the state test and the national test. And so I'm pretty heavily recommend that one. Like if anybody's getting their license, but it's called Real Estate Express. And I was like, man, this might be a gimmick, but it was good.
Yeah. I mean, I went with Kaplan because I thought it's such a big company, you know, they should have a pretty good handle on things. And I was disappointed with it. But I mean, I did okay on the test. Oh, you got a new puppy, Gail.
Is she
only turning on the video for you guys to see her. And then
Gail,
back to black.
Where's your other little guy?
It's a girl, right, Gail?
Yes, we've had only boys forever. It's our first little girl one.
That's so
wow, she's adorable.
Gail, you need to join my Durango Dog Lovers group on Facebook. Or any of you.
Did you send me an invite?
Yeah, I will. But it's for like doggy camping trips or whatever, dog walks and stuff.
Awesome.
That'll be great. It'll be great to have a puppy in the group when we're allowed to meet.
She's so fun.
Is she from a local individual?
Yeah, she's from Lisa Parker.
Oh, okay.
Lisa Parker's puppies. I just kind of, over the last 2 years, have sent Ian a lot of photos of puppies, and he was like, do you want this puppy? And I was like, no, I'm just sending it. And he was like, well, if you're not careful, I'm going to come home with a puppy one day.
That's, not something to argue with, I guess, right?
It was time. Our other blue heeler passed on about 2 years ago.
Has it been that long?
Tristan, yeah, it just came up in my memories.
Oh.
He left us 2 years ago. So, gotta get a bigger dog.
Yeah.
2 on the trail now. I'm doing laundry.
Me too. I just stopped it actually because it was being really loud. So.
Yeah, being sober, and he's doing really well.
Okay.
Did any of you guys go and tour the lots up there already?
Yeah, 5 of us went up. It was super cool. They were super organized with it. So it's nice. It's helpful to have someone there that can kind of show you the layout. I know Hosea was there. I was there. Hi, Jamie. Let me think. Patrick Jones. Trying to remember who. Who else came last week, Jamie?
Blair.
Uh-huh. That's the three of us, and then there are two more.
Shannon.
Shannon, right.
I tried to get over there, but I was showing property right during that time.
I'm glad you were showing property.
Yes.
Kid watching was another reason I got quite a few emails from people. They said they couldn't do it because they were on kid duty.
I heard from a half dozen people too what they were up to, and they couldn't.
Good.
But the good thing is the dirt's not going anywhere, so we can have a cooler and a drink on the lots anytime. So
That's super cool.
What?
you guys have to give Louis a hard time because he had a fishing trip, so he's missing his own class. So I'm here.
Well, I'm excited you're doing this, Jamie, because you have more experience in selling land than any of us at Coldwell Banker, for sure. What was the? She was updating her bio the other day, and what did you say? I'm gonna go find it with what her sales were. 50.
My career
Is it
sales
okay to
are
share?
at 52 million.
52 million, over $52 million worth of property she's sold. And that's with having chunks of years of not selling. Good job, Jamie.
No wonder I feel old.
Hey, Stacy.
Hi. How's it going, peeps?
Good. How's it?
Good.
Was the surgery okay?
Yeah, the surgery was fine. He's just really sore. He's in a lot of pain. And, you know,
I know he hates that.
I got to take care of things, so. Kind of sucky, actually. If you want to know the truth, it's kind of sucky.
Good word.
Yeah, it's been more than a year of this stuff.
Well, some of you, each time I see you, are in different locations within your homes. Like we got Rebecca over there outside today. We got Stacy, graduated from closet to room to porch.
Yay!
Leah's in a much more open space too. Before you were in a room, I remember that. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself, and whenever you're ready, take it away.
Okay. Well, I don't teach much, so I'd like it to be open conversation. Feel free to chat. I was telling Heather I have some here that I'm going to work my way through, and then I'll send them to you. So kind of, you know, listen along the way. Jot notes if you want to, but you don't have to write it all down. I will send it to you, kind of like Heather's meeting notes. But just wanted to kind of start from, you know, the 30,000 foot level and say, what if someone doesn't know anything about land, but in our world, what we're doing is helping our clients. So I tried to approach a lot of the different components from if you're working with a buyer or you're working with a seller, how can I help you help yourself, you know, sound intelligent, ask the right questions, find the right resources to help guide your clients the best you can. It's not a perfect, it's not an end all kind of class here, but I just wanted to help you all feel a little bit more comfortable with the terminology and the documents and the resources, because when you drive around and look at houses and tour homes, you're looking at the curb appeal, you're looking at what's the neighborhood like, how many bedrooms, how many baths, what's the condition, etc. When you drive around and look at dirt, a lot of it looks the same from the surface, but there's so many other components to it that you don't ever want to get, I mean, easements aren't spray painted in the dirt. You can't see them when you're driving around looking at things. So that's just one example that you want to make sure you're aware of, Louis and I always say, you know, you can't be experts at everything, but the end goal is to be able to ask the right questions and know who to ask them to get the right information and materials for your clients. Okay, so I'm starting with language, just to kind of cover some basic terminology. Let me, Heather, how do I turn on a chat? I don't know how to do that. Do you want to just let me know if somebody, oh, I see. I'll turn it on so I can watch for if there's any questions. So
I was muted. I'll let you know if there's a question. I'll kind of like raise my hand to you.
Perfect. So we all know the words like a lot, and a lot can be any size lot, really. I mean, a lot can be a commercial lot that's 5 acres for a big piece of retail, or it can be a residential lot that's, you know, 1/4 of an acre or 1/3 of an acre or 1/2 an acre. So the term lot is the most commonly used. The state legal refers to a unit and a lot are interchangeable. So you might hear it referred to as a unit, or when you're looking at a development parcel, it could say that it's platted or entitled or approved for like 12 units, and that would potentially be 12 lots. A lot can be single family lot, a commercial lot, a multifamily lot, and so that's the word you'll hear the most. A parcel is typically something a little bit larger. A parcel is typically raw land that's usually developable land, but it could be like a residential parcel if somebody wanted to do, you know, a 10-acre ranch or a 35-acre ranchette. That might be referred to as a parcel only because it's a larger piece, but it is also technically a lot. So don't let those words ever confuse you. They're just sort of, depends on who wrote the description of the listing that you're looking at. Some other terms that you would want to be familiar with are the site or the subject property or the subject site. Acreage is the term used similar to parcel, which would be for larger pieces of land. Open space is a type of land. So open space would be something you'd want to be aware of if a client is looking for something that has more of a buffer to whatever the neighboring property uses would be. So where Leah and I are out here in Edgemont, there's open space. So it's nice if you, otherwise you have a lot and the lot next door, there's, you know, typically a 10-foot and 20-foot setbacks for a residential lot. But if you're up against open space, it might feel more like you might feel like you have more like 30 feet between you and the neighboring property. So for someone who is in the price point of wanting to have, say, a 1/4 acre or 1/3 acre residential lot, but wants to feel like they have more space, you might want to be looking for something that's near open space. And let's see, so I think when you're working with a client, and let's say you're working with a buyer, one of the first questions you're going to want to ask them is, so they come to you, they say, I'm looking for a piece of land. What's the intended use? Are they wanting to build a home? Are they wanting to build an estate property that might have a main home with some guest homes? Are they looking to build a bank or a restaurant or a variety of uses? So the very first place you want to start is what's the intended use that they are looking for land for? That will really help guide you to start with, because if you start at the 30,000 foot level and say, okay, here's La Plata County or the Durango area, there seems like there's lots of land. We're going to get to that supply and demand question, but what's the intended use? And so if you have a client that's from another, let's say they're looking for commercial parcel of some kind to develop. If they're from out of town and they're from a bigger metro area like Albuquerque, Denver, Phoenix, they're going to say, I want to build an apartment community, 20 units. They're going to be looking for a certain piece of land that has a zoning for that use. Durango doesn't have zoning. So that's where you need to start with that conversation, because it's a little bit different. We have land use. We have a land use code, which they're just revising. So watch for that in the updates with the county and the city. But it creates some uncertainty a little bit. So if you're in Phoenix and you're saying, I want to build 20 units to the acre, you know, condo project, you're going to look for a certain zoning. It might be like R4 or something. And no matter what, if you buy a piece of land that's R4, you know 100% certain, as long as you follow architectural guidelines, that you can build that use. You don't have that certainty here, and that's part of the challenge with, you might hear some of the concerns with the planning and approval processes take longer than they do in metro areas because of that uncertainty. A buyer who wants to build a certain use on a property isn't going to close on their land purchase until they're certain and they have approvals that they can move forward and do that. So just, and I'll circle back to that as well with some good questions for you to ask and where to go with those. Let's see. I think the best place to start with that kind of thing, if you're working with someone who's wanting to do a car wash or a multifamily project or some kind of development or commercial use, I would strongly suggest you take that client and you call the planning department, either in the city or the county, and you schedule a meeting. They're happy to do that. They will sit with you and they will talk to the client and say, what is it your intended use is? So use the car wash as an example. The planners are going to be able to tell your client where that's going to be most likely to get approved and be acceptable to whatever municipality that you're in. They have identified corridors for commercial development. They have identified redevelopment areas. They have identified commercial corridors, which would be like North Main. That's a corridor. That's an identified area where they want to have redevelopment. You're seeing new buildings going up. You're seeing old buildings coming down. That's redevelopment. So that client is going to save time and money, and they're going to thank you for starting with the planning department to understand what their options might be for whatever their intended use is. Supply and demand. Does it seem like there's a lot of land here or a lot of lots? It's kind of, I don't know, it's a relative question. We have master plan communities like Twin Buttes, Edgemont Highlands, Edgemont Meadows, Edgemont Ranch, Three Springs, Dalton, the Purgatory area. Those are called master plan communities. What that means is there's a master association and there's a plan. Someone took a larger piece of land, a couple hundred acres, and identified where the streets are going to go, where the drainage is going to go, where the homes are going to go. In many cases, there's smaller lots that are less expensive, closer to traffic corridors. And then as you get further away from busy roads, there would be larger lots, higher value priced lots to build on. There might be common amenities. There might be commercial uses, or something like at Twin Buttes, they have the garden. We have a garden here in Edgemont Highlands as well. But when you look at all of those combined, there's quite a bit on the market now. There's a good supply of land. But there's not, I don't know, it would be hard to say, so short-term versus long-term. I think long-term, there's not a lot of lots here. At some point, we will be burning through those master plan communities, and that's essentially the city boundaries. If you spend, we're all realtors, our favorite places to hang out is the GIS website, right? So you can see when you look at the GIS, just kind of zoom out and get to like the city boundary, you can see it's pretty much developed. I mean, generally speaking, I wouldn't imagine that the city boundaries would move other than situations like Three Springs was incorporated. I think Twin Buttes is a hybrid. But as far as city services and city boundary, that's why you're seeing people buying homes and tearing the home down to build on the lot underneath it, something new. So there aren't a lot of lots in general. But we do have some in these outlying master plan communities that I talked about. Let's see. Another thing you'll notice when you look at the GIS versus if you're in your car driving around, if you're in your car, you're driving around, it looks like there's a lot of land. But when you look at the GIS, you will see large portions of it, hundreds of acres of portions right in town that are, and some people prefer an HOA. It's going to depend on their experiences. If they've lived in an HOA and had a bad experience, they're going to want to try to avoid it. If they lived in an area that didn't have an HOA and the neighbor had a ratty purple couch on the front porch for 10 years, they might be looking for something with a little more guidelines that's enforceable to help protect the value of their home. So that's another one of those personal preferences, kind of like utilities. You just have to ask the question. If they don't want to be in an HOA, you've just eliminated a huge amount of the supply of lots that are available. But so it's a good question to ask, and then you're helping narrow down to where they want to be. So again, once you ask, this is like, I don't know, 10 questions, and it can be done by email, it can be done by phone, whatever you're comfortable with. But once you get through those questions, you have a lot more information to help search, and most of those are searchable categories in MLS to help you find the right choices to send your clients to consider. Ask a lot of questions. Feel free to call the listing agents. If you kind of get it narrowed down, but you're not sure, or something comes up in your search that's a subdivision that maybe you're not as familiar with, call the listing agents. That's their job to promote the property. Ideally, there's documents and associated docs where you can learn more before you make that phone call. Many neighborhoods, Durango West, Purgatory, Edgemont, all have their own metro districts, and those metro districts have websites. Those websites have tons of information. If you've never been on one of the metro district websites, there's a schedule of fees. They give you the rates, what they charge. They have water quality reports, which might be a question you get from somebody. What's the water source? And most of them have board meetings that are public. You can attend. You can ask questions. Those people are all reachable and happy to answer questions if you get someone who's totally focused on the water quality. It just depends on people's historic experiences and where they've been good or bad experiences in previous homes. Associated documents is definitely your friend, and hopefully people have loaded things in there to help you. If you're the listing agent, please put things in associated docs. That's such a great resource for us, and make sure you make them public so that if I'm working with the buyer and I'm like, oh good, there's a site plan and there's all these documents here, I'm going to send these to my client. If you haven't made them public, I can't click and forward them out. So just a tip. Let's see. So let's talk about documents and due diligence. So you've worked with your client. I'm just going to go along with the scenario that you're working with a buyer, and you've narrowed it down, and you've got a series of lots that you want to study. You might even do a little more due diligence before you go tour. Because when you tour land, it does take a little longer because you really should walk it. It shouldn't be a car tour, even though you're like, well, here's another piece of dirt with trees on it, and here's another piece of dirt with trees on it. You should walk it. You'll be surprised what you see and what you discover, even if you're just walking a 1 acre lot. Certainly if it's a larger parcel, you should still walk it, and certainly, maybe focus on the boundaries or identifying any utilities or infrastructure that's installed. But definitely get out of the car and you need to walk them. But to do some research and some due diligence in advance will help you as well. You might discover something that eliminates one of your options. The first item that would be helpful to you would be a plat or a survey. A survey is essentially a map of the lot or the parcel that you're looking at. It will have dimensions. It's prepared by a surveyor, they're licensed. It will give you the dimensions of the boundaries. It will give you access. It will give you information about the neighboring properties. Really super important is easements. It should show you easements and access. There are pieces of land in the county that don't have access. Don't sell somebody a piece of dirt that they cannot get to legally, and a handshake with the neighbor that says, well, we've always just used this dirt road down the fence to get to it. Put it in writing. Right, Heather? There are lots of different kinds of surveys. So if you find a property and your client loves it and that's where they want to build their vacation home, you need to be very clear when you're writing your offer what kind of survey your clients are requesting from the seller, who's paying for it, and who's ordering it. The seller might say, well, I have a survey from 10 years ago. Your client might like to request that that be updated or verified. I will tell you that some surveyors are better than others. So personally, when I see whose name is on it, I know whether I feel like it needs to be double checked or updated. A very basic survey, which is the least expensive, is an ILC, and essentially that will show you the corners. When the surveyor prepares an improvement location certificate, they will put those pins in. They look like giant nails, right? I don't know if you've seen those, but they look like giant nails. The tip of them is about this big around, and it'll have numbers on it, and it will reference back to the map so that you will know exactly where you're standing. If you are going to take that client out and walk the properties, going back to that comment, take the survey plat with you. It will help you. You can walk those boundaries. You can say, okay, I can see where might be the best location on the property to build a home, right? Is it at the back of the lot with a long driveway? Is it right up front? Is it over to the side because that neighbor has horses or something that your client maybe doesn't want to be right next to? Take your map and walk the site. An ILC brand new is a couple $100 for like an acre or less residential lot, I would say, is a general budget. If your client is buying a 35-acre ranchette to build a legacy estate, they're going to want a higher level of detail on their plat. They might, end up with more like an Alta, which is the highest level of plat. It will show you any kind of infrastructure, which would include any roads that are in, any utilities that are in. Dry utilities would include things like cable, phone, and internet. If it's been stubbed out, which would mean that it's been run like maybe through a neighborhood like Sweetwater Springs, and then it goes to the edge of the parcel, and then your client would have to connect it to the home when they build. And then the wet utilities would be if there's water and sewer to the property, or if there's a well that's been drilled, and if there's a septic that's in place, there might be a cistern. A cistern, the best way to describe a cistern would be like a backup water supply to a well. So if you have a well and your well goes dry, you can have a water truck come out and fill up your cistern, and it's like a backup water supply, and then you just switch over from the well to the cistern and you still have water. Just FYI. Sorry, I'm skipping all around, so feel free to jump in if you want to. Let's see, architectural and design guidelines. So now you have found favorite lots for your client. You've researched the neighborhoods, you understand the utilities, you have it dialed in to your client's preferences for the things that we've talked about. And now they've told you they want to build a Santa Fe style home. That might not be acceptable in all neighborhoods. If it's a true neighborhood with an HOA, they are going to have architectural and design guidelines. These can be like 100 pages. There's a lot of detail. They can be very simple or they can be very specific. And just to give you an example, because I'm familiar with Edgemont, they have a specific requirement about roof pitches, exterior materials and colors, height from elevation to the top of your roof, driveway orientations, the size of your garage, and it's broken down by what street you're on and what neighborhood within Edgemont. So it's very specific. You, again, back to saving your client time and money. If they fall in love with a lot and they start working with an architect and spending money to design their home to that specific lot's topography and working with a builder and find out that their Santa Fe style home doesn't comply with the architectural guidelines, they're now back to shopping for a lot, and those plans may or may not work on the next piece of land that they find. So asking lots of questions and asking the right people up front will save everyone time and money, and your client will be happier in the end when they get what they're looking for. Some neighborhoods even have a minimum square footage. Some have a maximum square footage. So if size of home that your client wants to build is important, that would be something to look for in those design guidelines. Covenants. So many times those architectural or design guidelines are part of covenants. They're like an addendum to the covenants. The covenants are what you hear referred to many times as the CC&Rs, which stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions. This is like the rules of the neighborhood. This has to do with everything from pets and parking and RVs, and most of them will tell you how long you're allowed to leave your Christmas lights up and when they have to come down. playground equipment, trampolines, fire pits, fencing, dog runs, a whole variety of things will be in there. So if your client, back to those questions, if they have something really specific like animals, you know, most neighborhoods only accept domestic animals, but I think the city is chickens, right? You can have chickens in the city. I don't know. So if animals are important, is that right, Heather? Is it chickens
I was
in the
just going
city?
to say, believe it or not, there's covenants like Glenau, where I live. There's actually covenants that prevent that. And you would think it's in town. What does it matter? But not everywhere.
Well, and that's a perfect example where the city said it's okay,
Yeah.
but individual HOAs are allowed to have more restrictive guidelines. Did you have
I'm
a
allowed to
question, Stacey?
Well, I'm allowed to have chickens here, and I'm not far from Heather.
Yeah.
We're allowed to have up to 5 hens in my yard,
Interesting.
with restrictions like 5 or 10 feet away from your neighbor's property line. You have to be in a certain spot, but we're both in town, and one can and one cannot. So.
I would never have known, and I was an agent for 8-10 years when I bought my house. I had no idea till I got my title work. Yeah, one more note, and this is from Erica Simpson, and it's so true. Sometimes the barn or shed even has to match the house. Like some people, it can be pretty severe in some areas.
Yeah. Well, in Edgemont, you're allowed to have playground, playground equipment's probably not the right word, but like a jungle gym or whatever in your yard for your kids, but it can't be like the plastic blue and red stuff. It has to be like redwood with green accent so that it blends in with the architectural theme of the neighborhood. So people are really bummed when they order something and it arrives and they're installing it, and then they learn that there was a rule about what it is. So just ask the questions and read the documents. You'll be so glad that you did.
Can I break in with one thing? You might be getting
Sure.
to it anyway. Building envelopes is something when you're walking around the property to make sure that it's whether or not there's a survey, it'll show that. And then also the importance of like when you're working at Purgatory or Edgemont or anywhere like that, where you have those architectural guidelines that are 150 pages long of why it's great to hire not your builder out of Arizona, but somebody that's done this before in that neighborhood. It saves so much money for you.
Yes. And I had lots of calls, well, not lots, maybe a half dozen in the last year or so where, because there's some pretty great pricing on lots at Purgatory. And I always appreciated it. The agent would call and say, well, my client wants to, there's like a kit you can buy that's like a log cabin and they want to build it themselves. Probably not. Container houses, very cool in Edgemont or in Engineer Village, not so much. Tiny houses, there's a place for those. I think they're very cool. Not in Engineer Village. So
you got the same people I did.
Yeah, every time I'm like, really? I don't know. At least they called and asked up front. So ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Schedule of fees. So, I think one of the real estate 101 is stay in your wheelhouse. If land isn't your wheelhouse, it's okay to branch out as long as you're asking the questions and finding the right resources. But don't cross the line when you're walking properties with your client and they say, well, what do you think it's going to cost me to build 2,000 square feet on this lot? Giant can of worms. Just say, I would love to find some builders for you to talk to about that. Architects are also knowledgeable about the building costs. So if they already have an architect or they already have a builder, you don't necessarily need both early in the process for them to understand if the lot they're looking at is going to accommodate their budget and build the house that they want to build. There are different site components around the county. For example, Purgatory is like bedrock. Like even if it's a flat site, you are still blasting to get a footer in the ground. That's expensive. If you are in some of the county areas are somewhat patchy, but the site conditions and the soil conditions have different, the thing they're always looking for when they do a soils test, you're gonna have a geotech. So this is like down the line, you've picked out a lot, you're getting ready to build, but your client, if it's important to them or they're concerned, they might wanna have a soils test up front. That might even wanna be something that you would wanna write into an offer and say, is there a soils test available from a geotech? And they basically, what they do is it's like they dig really deep and they take a sample of soil, and they're wanting to know how far they can go before the clay, the percentages of the clay in the mix of the soils is really important to structural construction capabilities for a home. So all you need to know is soils are really important, and you can't tell from the surface. You just have no idea how. It's kind of like digging a well. You wouldn't know by walking a property how far they're going to have to drill to put in a well. It's impossible to know. It's underground. So soils are important. And so I think where was I? Schedule of fees. So the fees are going to be on the, if you're in an HOA, there will be a schedule of fees on their website. Or in the associated docs, if the listing agent has done you a favor. If you're in a metro district, there will be a schedule of fees. The city has a schedule of fees, and these can be a whole variety of things. It just depends on where you are and what you're looking at. So if your client is saying, well, I really, if they're really tight on their budget, they're going to want to be looking at those fees in advance of deciding on where they're going to go purchase a lot to build. In Edgemont, they're really high. I mean, in Purgatory, they're really high. But there's some resort fees in there, like lynx mitigation. That's so important. So if fees are important, they just need to be making sure that give them the resources and let them get on the websites and ask the questions. Another way that those are referred to is tap fees. And tap fees would be even if you're in an established neighborhood, if you are buying a lot and you need to tap into the main water and sewer system that's there, there's a fee for the water and sewer tap in. So if your client's focused on their budget, it's not just we're going to buy a piece of dirt and then we're going to spend X amount of dollars to build a house on it. There are lots of other costs involved. So just make sure you're saying, let's make sure we are looking into all the ways we want to make sure we're familiar with all the costs and clear. So geotech soils report, I touched on that. Walk the land, topography. So you're on GIS and you're saying, okay, we want to kind of focus in on, these two neighborhoods maybe. And you can see the lots. They look really flat on GIS. They are not all flat. You can have an acre lot that has a cliff or a rock outcropping that is not buildable. So if your client is looking to build a really big house and they're looking for a big lot, make sure it's buildable. This is part of your get in the car, go out, walk the lots, and it'll be really obvious to you. You can't, you can add the topography layer in GIS, but nothing replaces walking the dirt. What's next door? So when you get out and walk it, I think I already touched on some of this, but what's the view? You can't see the view from the GIS site. You can't see the view truly from a listing. It's hard to really capture. If it's a spectacular view, you really have to stand there and take it all in. Do a 360, turn all the way around if it's a panoramic view. What kind of native plants are there? What are the trees like? I have people in my house that are super allergic to the cottonwoods, so we're in the pine trees. These are important things. What's next door? What does it back up to? Does it back to a shopping center? Is that your view? These are important things. And be prepared if you're gonna dive in and be a land specialist. Make sure you have a variety of shoes in your vehicle, which would include snowshoes and snow boots. And that's fun. So don't be afraid to do that, because that's one of the fun ways to do it. So I touched a little bit on access and easements, but I don't think I got too much into the easements. An easement is a legally recorded document, which would be written as a narrative and also in a map form, so it's easy to see. And that shows you how you can use your land. So let's say you have an acre. There might be a utility easement through there that's for the HOA that it's in. There might be an easement for the neighboring property because they have a driveway that cuts through. These are things you can get from title. Anything that's recorded will show up on your title report. Even if you're still in the research stage, let's say, and you've narrowed it down to a handful of lots, you can get preliminary title, which will give you a quick picture of what's recorded against that property in advance of moving forward on a piece of land. Let's see. And title, on that note, title is really good at researching and being knowledgeable about certain areas of the county. And I'm not going to name any, but there are neighborhoods where somebody surveyed it 100 years ago, and the next guy that came along 50 years ago decided that those pins were off, or the federal government put in some pins, but they're off. So everything's off by 5 feet. If everything's off by 5 feet, that means your driveway might be on your neighbor's lot. And so title will work through all of that. And I've had to do that a couple times in Durango, where title and the agents involved will reach out to those neighboring landowners or whatever that is, and or whoever's involved, to re-record and redefine what is the true legal property, and making sure that access is clear. That's important. Let's see.
Jamie, I'm going to break in with a few notes that people have had. We had Erica that said other questions that people like to be aware of. Is it annexed into the city or town? Definitely with City of Durango, especially on Florida Road, never assume that something is in the city or it's out of the city. You can have—
some of them are both.
Yeah, you can have utilities, it could have sewer and water, it could have just water, and it might not be in town, but it has those. And then mixed use, what are your client's intentions? Totally makes sense. Henry noted that the whole not having a good survey happens so much more than you would expect. Leah said property taxes are important to consider too. Mill rate in Edgemont is around 48 and in Twin Buttes 106. Yep, I remember when that happened, we had a little office meeting note about that, how different it is. We were comparing cost of house and then what you'd pay in taxes with Twin Buttes. Three Springs is another one, Edgemont, and just regular in town. Big difference in your yearly property bill. And then Henry, or someone buys the property and puts something up and then the neighbor wants to sue because it's on their property. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, all good comments. I think I talked a little bit about don't advise on building. There are lots of really good builders in this town. There's lots of good architects in this town. They are happy to talk to your clients. You can talk, conference call and be part of it if you want to listen and learn and help keep track of what's happening with your client. Most of the architects and builders are quite knowledgeable about the variances across different neighborhoods. Personally, I would give I'd probably give a different builder architect recommendation depending on where they were looking and what they wanted to build. What I like to do, because most of them have pretty good websites with pretty pictures, and most of them have a style that's very identifiable, that if you give your client, 5 architects and 5 builders and say, here's their web addresses, get on their websites, they're going to find somebody that they really connect with, that they like the style or they like what they're seeing, or maybe it's someone that, like one of the comments, maybe it's someone that specializes in commercial or restaurants or that kind of thing. They're gonna start to kind of narrow it in. And then you can have those conversations about what's it going to cost me to build X in the Y location with that architect or builder. And that's really going to help you a lot. If they're from out of town, they're really going to appreciate that short list to consider. So they're not just blindly searching the internet for somebody. Signage. Signage is really different on different properties. If it's in an HOA, they usually have sign requirements about how big a sign can be and how many you can have on a lot. On a residential lot, if it's a commercial piece or a development piece, it's typically a much bigger sign. I think Gina and Heather have some big sign, or at least one big sign that, if you were looking for a sign and you were going to list this kind of property, but make sure it's big enough that when people are driving by, if someone's flying down 160 and you have a development parcel, make sure they can read at least the phone number or that tagline that needs to have a little bit more information, like 12 townhome lots, or zoned, or not zoned because we don't have it, commercial parcel. You know, maybe one day we'll have a Target. Wishful thinking, but so just make sure your signage is legible if someone's driving by at 65 miles an hour. Financing. So depending on the market that we're in, you can sometimes get financing for land and lots. So back to the, so let's say your client's going to purchase a lot for $100,000. They can typically get financing from a local bank for a large portion of that on pretty reasonable terms. And those are short-term loans. What that does is it makes it so your client, if they're thinking, well, we want to build, but in a couple of years, let's say you hear that, they might not realize that you can probably get a loan on that, which means you don't have to write a check for $100,000 today. If you find the lot that you're like, is the perfect lot for you, they should purchase it and hold on to it and get a loan. I mean, if it's like 3, 4, 5%, it's like free money. And then all they have to do is a down payment. When they get ready to build, they will have to take that loan out and pay off the lot, because typically when you have a construction loan, the lot is your equity. Most construction lenders, when your client goes to build, will require 20 to 30% equity in the deal. And that's typically, you know, the land paid off in the deal plus some cash as well. But just to say, if they're here and they're on vacation, or they come back and forth, but they're wanting to build, or they already have a home here, but they want to build something else, encourage them to look around and call the banks, because they might be able to secure a lot and make a purchase and carry it on a very reasonable terms for a couple of years until they're ready to build.
Jamie, who have you had luck with in town for land moving into construction? It's been too many years for me.
Oh, Bank of Colorado, Bank of San Juan's. We used to use First National, but now
So did I.
don't know TBK very well.
Same with Wells Fargo, but I don't know if they do anything.
I don't know about Wells Fargo for construction, but Bank of Colorado's game for sure. Yeah, and I think Alpine would certainly look at it. And last I checked, which was probably 6 months ago, they were all doing land loans. Totally subject to change, because you never know. I mean, there are times in our markets where there's no bank that will do a land loan. Because if you're a bank, you only loan on things that if you end up owning it as the bank, which they don't want to, they can sell it. And most dirt can't be rented. It's not cash flowable, and it's harder to sell than a house. So it just depends on where we are in a market swing, whether their flexibility allows them to consider financing on land. So I have a couple of quotes here, and one of them says, buy land because they're not making it anymore. And that was from Mark Twain. And one says, don't wait to buy land and wait. Will Rogers. And that's all I have. Happy to answer questions or take critique or whatever.
I'm gonna get out of here so I can see if anybody has any chats.
Dana McCreary at TBK does construction loans. That's from Aaron Shank. Thank you, Aaron.
Anything else people want to add or questions for Jamie? That was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie.
I guess that's it.
Thanks, Jamie.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how often this will actually come up, but have you ever had somebody buy a house that they later found out after closing was in a floodplain?
I believe floodplain certifications is a requirement from a lender, mortgage lender, when you're buying a home. So typically you would find out at that point. Like the majority of Dalton is in a flood zone. There's a river.
The only way you wouldn't is if you paid cash and the listing agent had no idea that it was, and I just can't see that happening. But anytime there's a loan, they always, I've always told people this joke, you have a house that you're buying at the top of a mountain, they're still gonna run a flood cert, whatever it is on it.
But you're right, if they pay cash, that's one of those, it's kind of like appraisals. If the buyer's paying cash, there might not be an appraisal. It's sort of optional at that point.
And then we have a note here, Dana also does hotels. Who's Dana?
Cool.
I don't know.
Dana McCreary.
Oh.
She was at First National Bank.
Okay.
She was one of their lead construction loan lender, or I don't know, lead, but she was in that department and then stayed with TBK. Anyways, I haven't used her since she was with TBK, but I've sent a lot of questions to her since the switch over, and she's been real helpful.
Well, I know also Jamie's super approachable. Like I always mention that if you have questions that you think of like a second after class or a year from now, just reach out to her because she's very willing to help, even if it's not her property she's trying to buy. We have a question through from Erica. Is it true that bigger banks don't require inspections every step of the way like local banks? That's a great question. Do you know, Jamie?
My experience has, I assume she means during construction.
That's what I'm assuming.
And my experience has been that everybody it requires them. So even if it's a bigger, we've done commercial developments here with out-of-state big banks, and they hired someone locally as a consultant to do those monthly walks. Typically, I think what she's referring to is when you're building and there's a monthly draw for funds against a construction loan, either the banker, if they're local, or someone that they hire out will inspect and walk the property and make sure that what you're saying is completed that needs to be funded is actually occurred.
I know that mine was Wells Fargo, but at the time they had Mike Fields, who was a on-site construction loan specialist. And so it was an in-house type thing. And that's just, I think the ship has sailed, because it used to be that with Wells Fargo, again, they didn't have all those inspections. They would just give you the money. But I think it's just different now ever since the crisis.
I think that banks, big or small, have to check a lot more boxes and put a lot more paperwork in their file to avoid problems today. In general.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Jamie.
Thank you.
Jamie.
Have a nice afternoon.